Red Bull's Silverstone upgrade has triggered what looks like open rebellion in the Formula One paddock. 2 new parts. For rival teams demanding urgent FIA attention. And one explosive question sitting over the entire weekend. Are Red Bull's parts illegal, or are the rivals terrified because they might be completely legal? That difference changes everything. The source confirms that 4 teams demanded an FIA check on Red Bull's 2 new Silverstone parts, but it does not confirm that the FIA has banned them. It does not name the 4 teams. It does not reveal the full technical identity of the parts. So the facts have to stay sharp. This is not a confirmed ban. This is something more dangerous. It is the moment before the verdict. Because if the FIA checks Red Bull's design and finds a problem, the upgrade could collapse before Verstappen fully uses it. But if the FIA checks it and clears it, the rest of the grid may have a nightmare on its hands. Red Bull will not just have advanced parts. Red Bull will have advanced parts that scared 4 teams, survived FIA scrutiny, and stayed on the car. Silverstone is the perfect place for this to explode. Fast corners. Heavy tire load. Brutal balance demands. A circuit where a tiny aerodynamic gain can become more confidence, more stability, and more lap time. If those parts make the Red Bull calmer through the fastest sections, everyone will see it. If Verstappen can attack earlier, carry more speed, or protect the tires better, everyone will feel it. And if the FIA allows it, then this rebellion may become the worst possible outcome for Red Bull's rivals. Because they did not stop the weapon. They revealed how afraid they were of it. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this first block matters, you have to look past the word ban. Because right now, the most important thing is not that Red Bull's parts have been banned. The source does not confirm that. The real story is that 4 teams reportedly believe the parts are serious enough to demand FIA attention before Red Bull can turn them into a full Silverstone advantage. That is a very different kind of pressure. And in Formula One, pressure before a ruling can be just as powerful as the ruling itself. Because once multiple teams start pushing the FIA, the entire meaning of an upgrade changes. It stops being just a new piece on the car. It becomes a question of fairness, interpretation, and control. Red Bull wants the story to be simple. 2 new parts. More performance. A better chance at Silverstone. The rivals want the story to be much more dangerous. 2 new parts. Possible gray area. Urgent FIA check. Maybe a design that should not be allowed to race without scrutiny. And that is why this feels like open rebellion. Not because the paddock has proven Red Bull guilty, but because several teams are refusing to quietly accept what Red Bull has brought. They are saying, not so fast. They are saying, the FIA needs to look at this. They are saying, before this becomes lap time, before this becomes race pace, before this becomes another Red Bull weapon, we need to know whether it belongs inside the rules. That is the heart of the story. Because Formula One teams do not demand checks over ordinary parts. They see upgrades every weekend. New wing shapes. New floor details. New cooling exits. New bodywork pieces. Small surfaces that guide the air in ways most fans never notice. That is normal. That is the sport. But when 4 teams react to the same Red Bull package, the tone changes. It suggests the parts may not look ordinary to the people who understand what they are seeing. And the people who understand what they are seeing are not guessing with emotion. They are looking at photographs. They are comparing regulations. They are studying how the car might behave at speed. They are asking whether a detail that looks small could create an effect that is much bigger than it appears. That is where Red Bull becomes dangerous. Because Red Bull has often been at its strongest when the advantage is not obvious at first glance. Not one huge, dramatic piece. Not one part that explains everything. But a system. One area feeding another. Airflow being shaped with purpose. The car working as a chain, where a small change at one point can improve the way another part behaves later. That is what rivals fear most. A visible part can be copied. A complete idea is harder. You can take a photograph of a surface, but you cannot instantly copy the reason it works. You cannot copy the way it interacts with the floor, the bodywork, the rear of the car, the tires, and the driver's confidence. You cannot copy months of understanding in one weekend. And if Red Bull's 2 Silverstone parts are part of a bigger system, then the FIA check becomes even more important. Because the rivals are not only asking whether the parts are legal. They are asking whether Red Bull has found a new route. A route they missed. A route that could become the next development battle. A route that, if allowed, may force everyone else to respond. That is why the timing matters so much. If rivals wait until after Silverstone, Red Bull may already have data. The team may already know how the parts behave in high-speed corners, how the tires respond, how Verstappen feels, and how much performance can be extracted. By then, the idea becomes harder to stop. Not legally, if it is truly illegal, but politically, technically, and psychologically. Because once a concept survives one race weekend, people begin to treat it differently. At first, the question is, should this be allowed? Then, if it keeps running, the question becomes, how do we build our own version? That shift is everything. And 4 teams demanding FIA attention suggests they do not want that shift to happen quietly. They want the line drawn now. Before the stopwatch normalizes the idea. Before Verstappen turns it into confidence. Before Red Bull uses Silverstone to prove that the concept works. Because Silverstone is not a soft test. Silverstone is one of the clearest judges in Formula 1. A car that is unstable will show it. A car that cannot protect its tires will show it. A car that gives the driver confidence will show it too. The track has fast corners that load the car heavily. It has sections where momentum matters. It has moments where the driver needs to commit with trust, not hope. And trust is exactly where Red Bull's rivals may be most worried. Because if these parts give Verstappen more trust, then the impact is not limited to one part of the lap. It spreads. More trust means earlier commitment. Earlier commitment means more speed carried through the corner. More speed means better exits. Better exits mean stronger straights. Fewer corrections mean less tire punishment. Less tire punishment means stronger long runs. And stronger long runs mean more strategic freedom. That is how one design idea can become a race weapon. Not by adding magic. By improving the chain. That is why rival teams react aggressively when they believe a part changes more than it appears to change. They are not only looking at the object. They are looking at the consequences. And with Red Bull, the consequences are always amplified by Verstappen. Give him a car he trusts, and he can turn a small improvement into visible pressure. He can attack corners sooner. He can force rivals into mistakes. He can make a race feel controlled even when the advantage is not enormous. That is why the idea of an urgent FIA check becomes so dramatic. The rivals may not be trying to stop a part because it is obviously illegal. They may be trying to stop a chain reaction before it begins. And this is where the word illegal becomes complicated. A rival can believe a part should not be allowed. The FIA can still decide it is legal. A team can design something in a gray area. The rulebook can require interpretation. A part can be clever enough to upset rivals without breaking the rules. That is why this moment matters more than the headline. The truth has not fully landed yet. The source does not confirm a ban. It does not confirm illegality. It confirms the pressure for the FIA to check. And that pressure is the real story. Because pressure reveals fear. Not always proof. Fear. Fear that Red Bull found something valuable. Fear that the parts may survive scrutiny. Fear that the rest of the grid may have to chase a concept they do not fully understand. Fear that Silverstone will reveal the design is not just unusual, but effective. And fear that the FIA might look at the parts and say, this is allowed. That would be the most painful outcome for Red Bull's rivals. Because then the rebellion fails to stop the idea. It only announces that the idea mattered. That is why Red Bull's response, even before any official ruling, becomes critical. The team has to stay calm. It has to show confidence without giving away too much. It has to satisfy the FIA without handing rivals a map. It has to run the package, if allowed, in a way that proves performance without making the controversy spiral out of control. That is not easy. A normal upgrade weekend is already full of pressure. You compare the new parts against the old ones. You listen to the driver. You check tire behavior. You adjust the balance. You watch the weather. You prepare qualifying and race strategy. But a controversial upgrade adds another layer. Now the team also has to manage scrutiny. Every garage cover matters. Every public comment matters. Every part change matters. Every fast sector becomes evidence for someone. If Red Bull looks strong, rivals will say the parts need deeper inspection. If Red Bull looks cautious, people will ask whether the pressure is working. If the FIA stays quiet, people will wonder whether the check was enough. If the FIA speaks, everyone will analyze every word. That is why this first block is so important. It establishes that this is not a simple story about a team bringing upgrades. It is a story about control. Who controls the limits? Red Bull, by pushing design into the most aggressive legal spaces. The rival teams, by forcing the FIA to examine those spaces. Or the FIA, by deciding whether the idea lives, changes, or dies. That is the fight underneath everything. And Silverstone is where it becomes visible. Because once the car runs, the theory starts turning into evidence. If the Red Bull is calm through the fastest sections, the questions grow. If Verstappen sounds more confident, the questions grow. If the tires look better over a run, the questions grow. If the car gains time and places rivals' expected weakness, the questions grow. And if all of that happens after the FIA allows the parts to remain, the message becomes brutal. The rivals saw the threat. They tried to trigger intervention. And Red Bull kept the weapon. That is why the pressure is so intense before the full answer arrives. Because everyone in the paddock knows what is at stake. If the parts are rejected, Red Bull loses a possible advantage. If the parts are accepted, the rest of the grid may lose something more valuable. Time. Time to understand. Time to copy. Time to respond. Time to stop Verstappen from turning a small Red Bull breakthrough into a much bigger problem. And in Formula 1, time is not just time. It is performance that has not arrived yet. It is upgrades that have not been built yet. It is races that may already be slipping away before the chasing teams even know what they are chasing. That is why 4 teams demanding FIA attention is such a loud signal. They may not have proven Red Bull is wrong. But they have shown they believe Red Bull might be onto something. Something advanced. Something worth checking. Something dangerous enough to challenge before Silverstone gives it a voice. And the most uncomfortable truth for Red Bull's rivals is this. A ban would end the threat. But FIA approval could make it stronger. Because approval would turn suspicion into permission. And permission is the one thing every great Formula 1 innovation needs before it becomes a weapon. Now the story moves into the part that makes this feel less like a normal technical dispute, and more like a political fight inside the paddock. Because when 4 teams demand urgent FIA attention, they are not only challenging a part. They are challenging Red Bull's right to define the edge of the rules. That is where the tension becomes much bigger. Every Formula 1 team wants to live near the limit. They all say they respect the regulations. They all say they build inside the rules. But the truth is, the fastest teams are always searching for the most aggressive interpretation possible. That is not an accident. That is the sport. If you stay too far away from the limit, you leave performance on the table. If you go too close, you risk a protest, a clarification, or a forced change. And if you cross it, the whole upgrade can become a disaster. Red Bull may now be standing in the most dangerous place of all. Close enough to the line that rivals are alarmed. But possibly still on the legal side. That is what makes the situation so uncomfortable for everyone else. Because if Red Bull had clearly broken a rule, the path would be simple. The FIA checks the parts fail, and the team has to change them. But if the design is advanced, controversial, and still legal, then the rivals have a much deeper problem. They are not fighting cheating. They are fighting genius. And genius is much harder to ban. This is why the word rebellion matters. The rival teams are not waiting politely for Red Bull to prove its concept on track. They are moving before the performance becomes accepted. They are trying to force the question early, while the parts are still surrounded by mystery, before Verstappen turns them into lap time, before the weekend starts building a story Red Bull can control. That is strategic. Because once performance becomes visible, the whole argument changes. If Red Bull runs the parts and the car looks fast, Red Bull can say the upgrades are working. Rivals can say the upgrades need checking. Fans can argue about whether it is clever or illegal. The FIA gets pulled into the middle. And every lap adds more pressure. So the rivals have a reason to act before the car does the talking. They want the FIA to define the line before Silverstone defines the performance. That is an important difference. Because Silverstone will not care about the politics. It will not wait for a perfect explanation. It will simply ask the Red Bull whether the parts work. And if they do, the evidence will appear in a way everyone can understand. The car will look calmer. The driver will commit earlier. The tires may look less punished. The lap may flow more naturally. And the stopwatch will begin to whisper the answer before anyone in the paddock is ready to say it out loud. That is what Red Bull's rivals fear. Not only that the parts exist. That the parts may reveal themselves through performance. Because when performance appears before regulation clarity, the fight becomes emotional. The team with the upgrade says, "We found something." The teams without it say, "The FIA must decide if that something is allowed." And suddenly the whole weekend becomes a battle over fairness. Fairness is the most dangerous word in Formula 1. Because it does not sound aggressive, but it cuts deeply. Every team wants to believe the same rules apply to everyone. Every driver wants to believe the car next to them is racing under the same limits. Every engineer wants to believe that if a rival is faster, it is because they were smarter, not because they found a way around the rules.